Assalamualaikum and hi. We are from Maverick and we are gonna present our Eportfolio online album assignment. And I, Muhammad Fadhlan bin Mudh Fadhlan with my group mates Aiman Akmal bin Azmi and Nurul Syazwani binti Muhammad Rahaiza.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Aiman Akmal bin Azmi from MC1102F. So today I would like to present the 5 pictures that I took from my online album, which is for the Eportfolio assignment for COM 264. Our group chose the theme, which is the Malay village scenery. So for my part, I had took the 5 pictures all about the village scenery in my place. We have 5 pictures that will be explained in this video. So in this video I will explain the settings of the picture and also the editing that I use for this picture. This is the first picture, which is the rice plow machine in the paddy fields. The concept that I use for the picture is the vintage look because it has a machine that farmer use to plow the rice in paddy field. For the setting, there are 3 settings in this picture, which is ISO, aperture and shutter speed. The ISO is 100, the aperture is f9 and the shutter speed is 1/160. Also for the editing, I had used the exposure, the contrast and also saturation. So this is the first picture. Okay, now we have look for the second picture, which is the village in the middle of paddy fields. Okay, so at this picture, we see that has a few houses in the middle of paddy fields. So the concept that I make for this picture is it look more greenish because it has the paddy fields plants in this picture. Okay, so for the setting is ISO is 100, aperture is f5 and shutter speed is 1/1000. Okay, so for the editing I had used the exposure, cropping, contrast and saturation, so it make the picture look more better. Okay, then we have the third picture for my part. Okay, the third picture is all about the farmer grow rice in the evening because at the time that I snap the picture, it has a man who is growing rice at the paddy field about 5 p.m. So the setting for this picture is ISO 100, aperture is f7.1. Editing using the exposure, contrast, saturation and also white balance. The concept that I make for this picture is about the traditional working of the paddy planting. So we see that the man is using his hand to plant the paddy plants. Okay, next for the fourth picture and the second last picture is all traditional village. Okay, the concept that we seeing in this picture is it look more bluish for the sky and also the greenish and the side of the village itself. So we see that the picture is look more better when we took for this angle. Okay, so the setting for this picture is for the ISO is 100, aperture is f8, shutter speed is 1/200, and for editing I'm using the exposure, contrast, saturation and also highlights. Okay, so it make the picture look more better. For the last picture is the panoramic views of the paddy fields. Okay, the time that I shot the picture is all about around 7 p.m. So for the setting is ISO for this picture is 100, aperture is F10. Editing, I'm using the exposure, contrast, saturation and vignette because I would like to make the pictures more darker. Okay, so that's all my explanation in my picture. So I hope this is a better explanation. So thank you and Assalamualaikum.
So, hi. So, for this picture, I set the ISO at 125, exposure is at f1129, and shutter speed is at 1:1:5. So, the editing apps that I use to edit this picture is using the Lightroom app. So, I edit this picture at the contrast, saturation, sharpening, and exposure. Contrast and exposure, I made it a little bit down, so the picture is not going to be such a bright, I see, not too bright like the original picture. So for the next picture is this picture. This picture, as you can see, as a coconut trees that bring out the nature of the Malay village. So at this picture, I set the ISO at 200. Aperture is at f480 and shutter speed at 1250. So the editing that I'm using here is contrast, saturation, sharpening, texture, highlight, and dishaze. So as you can see, I increased the light, the color of green, and the color of skies. So for the next picture is this picture. As you can see a land road there and a red bunga raya. So this picture, I set the ISO at 200, exposure as f418, and shutter speed at 1250. So I edit this picture at the contrast, saturation, sharpening, texture, highlight, and dehaze. So this picture is really bringing out the village road. Yeah. So for the next picture is this picture. As you can see, there's a little kid playing under the rambutan trees. So this picture, I set the ISO at 320, exposure at f 3.8 21 millimeter, and shutter speed at 1250. So the editing that I'm using here is contrast, saturation, exposure, and healing. So all these four pictures, I cache it at my own house, around my house, because I actually living in the village. So that's all.
The reason why I choose this picture is because when I walk around the Kampung Kubang Semang, I saw a nice village and a beautiful scenery it got there. And the setting for this picture is ISO 400, aperture f/11, and shutter speed 1/500. And the editing that I do for this picture is exposure negative 0.8, contrast 5, highlights negative 58, and shadows 21. And the white balance for this picture, I edit temperature negative 18, tint 0, vibrance 11, and saturation is 1. Why I do the editing to this picture is because I want this picture to look more greeny and be a beautiful and look more warm and cool, so that this picture will be a beautiful scenery for the picture. The second picture is the rice plow machine in paddy field. I saw an old rice plow machine in the paddy field. So the settings for this picture is ISO 320, aperture f/11, and shutter speed 1/500. And the setting that I do for this picture is exposure negative 0.4, contrast negative 14, highlights negative 35, and shadows negative 29. And the white balance for this picture is temperature negative 14, tint negative 28, vibrance negative 16, and saturation 20. Why I choose the editing like that for this picture is because I want to make the picture looks warm and the color is more greenish, and so it will be nice for the picture and for the scenery. Okay, the third picture is Surau Kampung Penanti. The reason why I chose this picture is because this surau is very old, but it still can serve as a worship for the Muslim in the Kampung Penanti. And the settings for this picture is ISO 400, aperture f/11, and shutter speed 1/400. And the editings that I do for this picture is exposure negative 0.26 and contrast 5 and highlights negative 62. And the white balance that I edit for this picture, temperature negative 11, tint 0, vibrance 18, and saturation 19. So when I do this editing, I can see a beautiful scenery and the more colorful of the picture. So that's why I choose all the editings for this picture. Okay, so the last picture is this, a peripheral, an empty peripheral. So why I choose this picture is because it feels like our life empty if we don't do anything. It's same to the peripheral. If we don't do anything to the peripheral, it will be empty. So the settings for this picture: ISO 220, aperture f/11, and shutter speed 1/500. And the editings that I do to this picture, exposure 0.07, contrast 6, highlights negative 33, and shadows 49. And white balance for this picture is temperature negative 35, tint 0, vibrance 9, and saturation 0. So why I choose this editing for this picture is because I want to look it calm, it warm, cool. So this picture will see like it was not hot on that day.